If I told you that a geopolitical standoff thousands of miles away in the Middle East was the direct reason your ketchup bottle in Tokyo is suddenly changing color this week, you probably think I was connecting invisible dots.
Right. It sounds a bit like a conspiracy theory at first.
Exactly. But when you actually lift the hood on how our modern world operates, you realize how incredibly fragile these massive global systems really are. I mean, a disruption on one side of the planet doesn't just stay there.
No, it ripples through everything.
Mhm.
Supply chains, administrative systems, and even, as we'll see later, the safety of our own neighborhoods.
Yeah, it really does. So welcome to your personalized deep dive. Today is Friday, May 15th, 2026, and we are thrilled you're joining us.
We've got a lot of ground to cover today.
We really do. We're going to start by getting you completely caught up with a rapid-fire look at this morning's most critical news. We're talking the economy, crime, and international affairs.
Think of it as your morning espresso shot of information, fast, structured, and strictly need to know.
Right, just give you the underlying mechanics so you can see the bigger picture before you start your busy day. And then we're going to transition into a deep dive on one highly alarming domestic story.
Yeah, the terrifying incident in Tuchiki.
Exactly. We're breaking down the timeline of that robbery murder because it fundamentally challenges everything we thought we knew about neighborhood safety. But let's start with the economic landscape because there has been a massive corporate earthquake.
You talking about Honda, right?
I am. Honda has just reported its first ever operating and net deficit since going public in 1957.
Oh, wow. Since 1957.
Yeah, it's historic. We're looking at an operating loss of 414.3 billion yen and a final net loss of 423.9 billion yen.
To put that in perspective, I mean, this is a company that has navigated oil crises, financial crashes, natural disasters, all without falling into the red.
Right, so what pulled a historically profitable giant down this year?
Well, it was the staggering cost of abruptly scaling back its North American electric vehicle strategy.
I think people often hear scaling back and assume a company just, stops spending money. But hitting the brakes on a massive pivot like that is incredibly expensive, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's not like updating a piece of software. Car manufacturing is deeply physical and really capital intensive.
Right.
When a company commits to an EV transition, they aren't just designing new cars. They are building entirely new supply chains, signing massive multi-year contracts for lithium and cobalt.
So they're locked in.
Exactly. They are physically retooling assembly lines, building battery plants, retraining thousands of workers. So when you suddenly have to hit the brakes because of market shifts, you don't just get your money back.
Get left holding the bag.
Yeah, you're left with broken supplier contracts, stranded physical assets, and billions in sunk R&D costs. That 414 billion yen operating loss is just, well, it's the sound of a massive industrial machine trying to throw itself into reverse.
That makes total sense. It's the friction cost of changing direction at high speed. And speaking of physical supply chains hitting friction, let's look at how global instability is hitting Japanese consumers in really surprising ways.
This is the ketchup story, right?
Yes. The geopolitical crisis in the Middle East is now directly altering the products in our grocery stores. Kagome is changing its iconic ketchup packaging starting in late May.
Right, they're taking off those big tomato illustrations.
Exactly. They're stripping away the large tomato graphics and making the bottles mostly transparent.
And the underlying mechanism here is so fascinating. Kadome isn't doing this for, like, a rebranding campaign. They're doing it because of a severe shortage of white ink.
Which feels like such a strange thing to run out of. Why specifically white ink, and what does that have to do with the Middle East?
Well, to print bright, colorful labels like a vibrant red tomato on a clear plastic bottle, you first have to lay down a solid layer of white ink as a base.
Oh, I see. Otherwise the colors are see-through.
Exactly. They'd be translucent and look terrible. But the chemical components required to manufacture that specific white ink rely heavily on petroleum derivatives.
Ah, there's the connection.
Right. So with the geopolitical instability in the Middle East disrupting global oil flows, those specific derivatives are in short supply.
Wow.
By switching to transparent bottles with minimal graphics on their larger products, Kagome can cut their white ink usage by about 50% per bottle, which means they can actually keep shipping ketchup.
It is wild to think about. It's a true butterfly effect. The Middle East conflict restricts oil derivatives, which restricts white ink, which literally removes the tomatoes from your ketchup bottle.
It really is. And it's not just consumer goods either.
Right. This exact same supply chain issue is delaying home construction across the country. People are being told their move-in dates for new houses, some scheduled for July, are being pushed back.
Because builders cannot get insulation materials, it's the exact same chemical bottleneck.
How does that work?
Modern home insulation relies heavily on polyurethane foams and boards, and those require naphtha to manufacture.
And naphtha comes from oil.
Exactly. It's a liquid hydrocarbon mixture derived directly from crude oil refining. So the same crude oil disruption that makes it hard to get the plastic base for ink makes it incredibly difficult to manufacture foam boards.
So builders physically cannot close up the walls of these new homes. We're just seeing the raw vulnerability of our infrastructure. Everything requires these perfectly timed chemical supply chains.
It really highlights how interconnected everything is.
Definitely. Let's touch on our last economic note, which is how the government is trying to shield us from some of this energy friction. They are considering reinstating electricity and gas subsidies from July through September.
Right, to combat rising utility costs right as the summer heat hits. The mechanism they are looking at is utilizing a reserve fund of roughly 1 trillion yen.
But the government is walking a very precarious tightrope here, aren't they?
Very much so. They are already tapping into those same reserve funds to subsidize oil wholesalers.
Right, which is how they're keeping gasoline prices capped at around 170 yen per liter at the pump.
Exactly. So they are burning the candle at both ends, subsidizing gasoline to keep transportation moving, and now potentially subsidizing the grid to keep air conditioners running.
If energy prices spike globally again, that 1 trillion yen reserve could evaporate very quickly.
It definitely could.
So we see these systemic tightropes everywhere. Which brings us to a deeply frustrating update in our crime and incident briefing. Because sometimes the system doesn't just strain it, outright fails.
You're talking about the Fukushima bus crash.
Yes. We have new details regarding the horrific bus crash on the Banetsu Expressway that killed a high school student. It turns out the arrested driver, who was driving the school's tennis team, had caused at least 5 other accidents just since last month.
The breakdown in the administrative safety net here is just glaring. I mean, the police were entirely aware of the danger.
That's the part that is so hard to swallow.
Right. They had actually visited this driver's home twice, once early last month and once late last month, specifically to urge him to surrender his commercial driver's license.
This is the part that I struggle to understand. If law enforcement recognizes that a commercial driver has caused 5 accidents in a matter of weeks, and they're concerned enough to physically go to his house twice,
Yeah.
how is he still legally allowed to get behind the wheel of a bus full of teenagers?
It comes down to the gap between administrative procedure and immediate legal authority.
Explain that.
In many jurisdictions, forcibly revoking a license requires a formal accumulation of specific penalty points or a medical disqualification.
Which involves hearings and paperwork.
Exactly. And that takes time to process. So urging voluntary surrender is a shortcut police try to use to get a dangerous driver off the road immediately without waiting for the bureaucratic gears to turn.
But when the driver refuses, as happened here, the system leaves this lethal window of time where a known threat is still legally licensed to drive.
It's a tragic blind spot. The warning signs were flashing bright red, the authorities saw them, but the administrative gears just moved too slowly to prevent a disaster.
It's just devastating. Okay, let's finish the morning briefing by looking at how leaders are trying to manage these massive international pressures. A major U.S.-China summit just concluded in Beijing.
Right, between President Trump and President Xi Jinping. And the diplomatic framing from both capitals heavily emphasized stability.
Which is interesting given recent tensions.
Yeah. President Xi actually proposed making 2026 a landmark year for U.S.-China relations, stating the two nations should act as partners.
And on the ground, this translated into some pretty significant economic agreements. President Trump announced China will execute massive purchases of American products.
Specifically, U.S. agricultural goods like soybeans.
Right, soybeans, massive shipments of LNG liquefied natural gas, and an agreement to purchase 200 Boeing aircraft. He also noted that President Xi promised not to send military equipment to Iran.
And you know, the selection of those specific purchases is classic trade diplomacy. Well, they are high-value, high-volume exports that immediately impact the trade deficit. That plays incredibly well domestically in the U.S.
while allowing China to secure necessary energy and agricultural resources.
Uh-huh.
It's a win-win on paper.
Exactly. But the underlying geopolitical tensions are still very visible, depending on where you look.
Right. For instance, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio stated that U.S. arms sales to Taiwan were not a major topic of discussion during the summit.
But meanwhile, Chinese state media prominently highlighted that President Xi explicitly warned the U.S. about Taiwan, saying that mishandling the issue could push relations into a highly dangerous situation.
So it's a clear demonstration of parallel signaling. The U.S. administration is signaling economic victories, while the Chinese administration is publicly drawing firm geopolitical red lines.
It's a delicate balancing act on the global stage, for sure.
It really is. Okay, so you are now completely caught up on the morning's essential news. But we are going to shift gears now.
Yeah, time for the deep dive.
Exactly. We just talked about systemic negligence in the Fukushima bus crash, a tragedy where the threat was known, but the system failed to act in time.
Right.
For our deep dive today, we are looking at a threat that is entirely deliberate, highly organized, and hiding right in our own backyards. We are focusing on the violent robbery murder that took place yesterday in Kaminokawa, Tochigi Prefecture.
This case is sending shockwaves through the country, and it's mostly because of the chilling disconnect between the masterminds orchestrating the violence and the people actually carrying it out.
I really want to walk through exactly how a quiet agricultural community suddenly becomes the target of a violent coordinated strike by outsiders. Like, how does that happen? Let's break down the timeline of this nightmare, starting yesterday morning.
Okay, so the attack began around 9:30 a.m.
Which is already striking to me. 9:30 in the morning in a farming community means people are awake, working, highly active. I mean, it's broad daylight.
Yes. The target was a large residential compound surrounded by rice fields. The family living there, the Tomiyamas, runs a large-scale agricultural business, specifically rice wholesaling.
Okay.
At around 9:30, the husband, who is in his 60s, was working outside in the nearby fields. He suddenly heard a scream coming from the main house.
Oh my God.
It was his 69-year-old wife, Aiko Tomiyama. He immediately contacted his two adult sons, who are in their 40s and 30s, and they all rushed toward the residence.
I mean, you hear your wife scream from the house, you drop everything, you call your kids, and you run inside. It is literally a parent's worst nightmare. What confronted them when they opened the door?
They were met by multiple attackers inside their own home. The intruders were dressed entirely in black, wearing thick coats despite the summer heat, with white gloves.
Wow.
And their faces were completely obscured by black balaclavas. And they were armed with crowbars. A violent altercation broke out immediately.
It's sheer terror. You walk into your living room and face a team of masked people with weapons.
The outcome was devastating. The mother, Aiko, was found collapsed in a ransacked room. She had sustained fatal stab wounds to her chest.
That's just horrific. And the sons.
The two sons who rushed in to help were brutally attacked as well. They suffered severe injuries to their heads and ears from being beaten with the crowbars.
It's awful.
And after the assault, the perpetrators fled the scene on foot.
Wait, they fled on foot after committing a murder and a brutal assault in broad daylight? They just ran away into a rural farming community.
Yeah, they just took off on foot.
That detail leads directly into the capture, which is where this story takes a truly bizarre turn.
Exactly. The police swarmed the area immediately, obviously looking for anyone matching the description. And about an hour later, they secured a suspect.
Where was he?
He was just walking down a road near the crime scene.
An hour later, just walking down a country road.
Yeah. And when they identified him, the entire nature of the crime shifted. The suspect, who has since confessed to his involvement, is a 16-year-old high school student. He has absolutely no connection to Tochigi. He lives in Saigimiar City in Kanagawa Prefecture, which is hours away.
It's like a glitch in the Matrix. You have a 16-year-old kid from a dense city just aimlessly wandering down a country road right after a highly coordinated home invasion.
It's totally incongruous.
Yeah, that kind of geographic and demographic disconnect, it points to something deeply orchestrated and unnatural.
Investigators recognized the pattern immediately. A former Kanagawa prefectural police investigator analyzed the signatures of this attack, and he highlighted a terrifying paradox.
What's the paradox?
The crime displays massive amateurism, but it's driven by deadly sophisticated organization.
Let's analyze that amateurism, because striking at 9:30 a.m. makes no sense to me.
Yeah.
If I'm an organized criminal, I want zero confrontation, right?
Exactly. Professional burglars meticulously plan escape routes and avoid people at all costs.
Right, but hitting a house when everyone is awake and then having no getaway vehicle, so your crew is just walking down the street afterward. It feels like a total disconnect between whoever planned this
Yeah.
and the people holding the crowbars.
You've hit the nail on the head. These tactical blunders are the defining hallmark of the most dangerous trend in modern crime right now. It's called Yami Beito, or dark part-time jobs.
And those are orchestrated by Tukri, right? The anonymous, fluid criminal syndicates.
Yes, the cloud-based crime networks.
So how do they actually operate mechanically? How does a syndicate do this?
They operate by entirely separating the intelligence gathering from the execution. Remember that the Tomiyama family runs a rice wholesale business.
Right, which is notoriously cash-heavy.
Exactly. So the syndicates monitor rumors or use local scouts to identify a target likely to have large amounts of cash on hand.
Okay, so the syndicate identifies the target, but instead of sending their own crew, they turn to encrypted apps and social media. It's essentially like a rideshare app, but for violent home invasion.
That is a chillingly accurate analogy. They post advertisements on social media offering high-paying, quote-unquote, easy courier or security jobs.
And who are they recruiting?
They prey on disposable teenagers, like this 16-year-old from Kanagawa, kids who might have online debt or are just desperate for quick cash.
Wow.
Once the recruit is on an encrypted app, the syndicate gives them an address, tells them to buy black clothes and a crowbar, and sends them in completely blind.
They don't give them a getaway car. They don't tell them who is home. They just point a desperate kid at a house and tell them to break in.
Because the syndicate has completely decentralized the physical risk, the mastermind orchestrating the attack is perfectly insulated.
Right, they're sitting behind a screen, likely in another country or a completely different prefecture.
Exactly. They don't care if the 16-year-old botches the escape and gets caught walking down the road. If the teenager is arrested, the mastermind loses nothing. They just recruit a new disposable pawn tomorrow.
It's just sickening. Meanwhile, a 16-year-old destroys his life and a 69-year-old woman is murdered. It is literally the weaponization of disposable youth.
It really is.
But what I find truly terrifying about this specific case, and what you as a listener need to understand as you think about your own neighborhood safety, is that this wasn't a sudden invisible strike.
No, not at all.
The sources show there was a massive buildup to this attack, and the neighborhood actually knew it.
Yes. For at least a month prior, the community reported highly suspicious activity. Neighbors saw unfamiliar motorcycles with their license plates bent upward to obscure the numbers.
That's a huge red flag.
Dark-colored cars were seen lingering near the Tomiyama property for hours at a time. The syndicate was actively scouting the location.
See, I always hear from law enforcement that community vigilance is the ultimate deterrent. If you see something, say something. Lock your doors. Talk to your neighbors.
Right, that's the standard advice.
But the residents in Kaminokawa did everything right. I mean, the victim's son actually confronted one of these scouts on a scooter.
He did. The scout gave a flimsy excuse about waiting for a friend.
And the son literally took photos of the man and the suspicious car.
And the neighborhood mobilized. They circulated those photos on a community line group. They posted physical warnings on the local bulletin boards.
They even alerted the local volunteer fire department, right?
Yeah. Residents were actively locking their doors and keeping watch. They were the textbook definition of a vigilant, proactive neighborhood.
This is what I am really struggling with. If a family and a community do everything perfectly, they confront the scouts, they share intelligence online, they lock down their homes,
Yeah.
and it still ends with a group of masked men kicking the door in at 9:30 a.m. and murdering someone.
Yeah.
How are we supposed to defend against this? I mean, does traditional neighborhood security even work anymore? Are we entirely vulnerable?
Well, it forces us to realize that traditional deterrence was designed for a totally different kind of threat.
What do you mean?
The old model of locking doors and sharing information works incredibly well against a local, opportunistic burglar. That kind of criminal possesses a sense of self-preservation.
Right. If a local thief knows the neighborhood is on high alert or knows their photo is on a line group, they're going to abandon the target because they don't want to go to prison.
Exactly, because the person scouting the house and the person breaking into the house are the same person. They absorb all the risk.
Ah, I see.
But the Tokuryu network shatters that connection entirely. The scouts who were confronted and photographed weeks ago are disjointed nodes in the network. They simply fed the address back to the cloud.
So the 16-year-old from Kanagawa who showed up yesterday morning with a crowbar, he had no idea the house had been warned.
None. He wasn't there weeks ago. He was just handed a GPS pin on an encrypted app that morning.
The syndicate doesn't care if the house is vigilant because the mastermind isn't the one walking through the front door. The attacker is primed for violence, completely ignorant of the neighborhood's defenses, and treated as disposable by their own bosses.
Exactly. It completely bypasses the psychology of traditional deterrence.
That is the dark reality of this shift.
When the threat model evolves from a local thief trying to avoid detection to an anonymous, decentralized cloud network willing to deploy proxy attackers with crowbars in broad daylight, the defensive calculus of an open neighborhood fundamentally breaks down.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to mull over today. We started by looking at how global supply chains are so fragile that a conflict overseas can change the ink on a bottle in your fridge.
Right, the butterfly effect.
But the digital revolution has created a devastating supply chain for crime, too. If it is now this frictionless to organize fluid, anonymous syndicates that can direct violence at a quiet farm town from a smartphone hours away.
Yeah, what's next?
Exactly. How long until regular everyday neighborhoods feel forced to abandon the open community model entirely? Will we start seeing gated communities, private security patrols, and high-walled compounds not just in wealthy urban enclaves, but in rural agricultural towns?
The events in Tochigi strongly suggest that the architecture of how we live and defend our homes is going to have to adapt to this new reality.
Are the days of trusting that a locked door and a watchful neighbor are enough to keep you safe slowly becoming a relic of the past? It's a heavy, unsettling shift to consider, but understanding the mechanics of how these threats operate is the first step in adapting to them.
Absolutely.
We want to warmly thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Stay safe, stay curious, and we will catch you next time.